The Philokalia, the Greek title meaning love of the beautiful, was originally used for the instruction of monks in the Middle Ages. Broken up into 4 volumes, the text is an anthology of works by great contemplatives and theologians, focused on the practice of the contemplative life and mysticism. Today, the community at Mount Athos is the greatest embodiment of the values expressed in the Philokalia. A sacred place and accessible to most, the peninsula is reachable by boat and only to a strictly limited number of visitors. Historically, the contemplative tradition has its origins in the Essene movement of the 1st century, instances of it occurring in the teachings of Christ and John the Baptist. During the medieval period, the hard prescriptions taught by Christ in the Gospels were applied by devout seekers. Anthony the Great, one of the desert fathers who lived in Egypt under Byzantine rule, compiled what became the virtues of the monastics. The Philokalia then became a compendium of many of these values. If you read the Philokalia, one of its most interesting features is the glossary included at the end of the text. Similar to Ouspensky, the work presents its own system of psychology. Its acolytes, called Hesychasts, their ideal was to cultivate a state of inner silence. This state of stillness represented the soul's liberation from the world and its fetters, as far as possible, purifying the self from the body prior to death. The first goal of the Hesychasts was to cultivate discernment or discrimination, a power of critical reason. This faculty let you navigate the world easily, gave you an ability to discern the merit of spiritual teachers, as well as providing an insight into your inner life and mind. While a modern reader may be confused by the textual references to demons, their temptations, and their assaults on the mind, we can interpret this from a psychological perspective. For the Hesychast who seek stillness, demons embody the mental provocations and passions that assail us in our natural state. The Hesychast seeks discipline over the discursive mind, replacing it with the higher intellect. In this regard, they're influenced by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. The Philokalia examines the topics of delusion and fantasy, its literature characterizing them as spiritual ailments that plague the mind. The work expresses a Manichaean view of Christianity, similar to that expressed by St. Paul, one where the human being is divided into flesh and spirit. The flesh is worldly, perishable, and impermanent. The spiritual is immortal, enduring, and transcendent. The idea being that the practices of the Hesychasts builds, refine, and perfect the spirit. The spiritual heart is also a tenet of hesychasm. As a result of their withdrawal from the world and turning inward, the contemplative goes through an emotional refinement and a mystical transformation, symbolized by the opening of the heart. They experience a joy-making morning, where they shed the outer layers of identity and gain access to the higher emotions like joy. At the same time, as a product of opening the heart, like the heart center in Indian traditions, the contemplative invokes the experience of spiritual tears. These come from a practice of penitence, thinking over the past and one's former deeds. Lamenting their imperfection, the contemplative pays a kind of debt incurred from birth, rectifying their relationship with the divine. This phenomenon of spiritual tears is alluded to throughout mystical literature, for example in the writings of John Climacus and Marjorie Kemp. In a prior video, we explored the idea of alchemy, the idea that as a result of these introspective practices, a kind of chemical transformation happens in the body. While thinking over the past often provokes the initial spiritual tears, once begun, they often occur spontaneously, suggesting that a kind of chemical transformation starts to take place. It works like John Climacus. He describes how the contemplative overcomes sorrow, anger, and fear as a result of this. A thesis of the Philokalia is that we're born in a state of imperfection, a major tenet of Christian theology. At the same time, this idea has an antecedent in ancient Greek mythology as well, in its tragedies. Faced with this, the spiritual aspirant seeks redemption. In Dante's theology, this means purifying the self of the 7 deadly sins, reclaiming the natural state of grace and a union with nature, re-entering the pre-fallen state of man in the garden before the fall. This process involves catharsis and results in the passions giving way to a new state, the condition of contentment and self-satisfaction called dispassion. Here we find another ancient Greek philosophy, Stoicism, in the Orthodox tradition. The word not having the negative connotation of our time, the Hesychasts seek apathy or apatheia, a state of liberation from negative emotions, a noble acceptance of the harsh inequalities of life, making the most of whatever hand we've been dealt by fate. A consequence of all the efforts of the Hesychasts is a profound transformation of the self, referred to as the metanoia. While this term is translated into English as repentance, to think things over and come to a new understanding of the present, this fails to communicate the subtlety of the term. Taught by Christ and John the Baptist, metanoia brings a new vision of the world and one's place in it. It leads to a reassessing of all one's values and principles. It reforms an individual and produces a right relationship with oneself, others, and the divine. Beyond this transformation, the abstentions of the ascetic life help pursue the state of perfection alluded to by Christ in the Gospels. The Hesychasts seek the supernatural virtues, chastity, poverty, and obedience. These hard prescriptions, not binding for the masses, were intended for those who sought to achieve the fullness of the spiritual life. Perfection is alluded to very occultly in the Bible, but based on Christ's comments, describes a state where the spirit overcomes, subordinates, and transcends the body. The Hesychast gives up the pursuit of sensual pleasure, viewing it as a source of defilement and a fetter. The Hesychast gives up property, wealth, and rank in the status hierarchy, viewing it as a vain pursuit in a temporary world. And he subordinates his will to a spiritual teacher, a confessor or abbot, who gives them counsel in their path of personal growth. Though they disdain hierarchy, the Hesychast looks to the ladder of divine ascent, that described by Jacob in the Bible, and extrapolated on as an allegory by the Greek spiritual teacher John Climacus. A further teaching of the Philokalia is that of the Platonic soul. Another ancient Greek philosopher integrated into the Orthodox tradition. In his work The Republic, Plato divided the soul into 3 parts: intellect, anger, and desire. In Platonism, he argued that the goal of the philosopher was to establish justice in the soul. A rightly ordered soul was one where the intellect ruled over the body with the aid of anger, controlling desire. In the Philokalia, this represents an acolyte who's ascended in the mystic life, passed through the stage of purgation, and achieved a state analogous to that of Dante at the end of purgatory, the condition of man in the garden prior to the fall. If we use Mount Athos as an example, we can see how the Hesychasts follow the hard prescriptions of the Bible. Following Paul's line to come out from among them and be separate, they embrace a voluntary death to family, friends, and concerns. This results in a radical self-simplification, turning all one's needs and wants over to God. Renouncing even familial concerns, this accepts Christ's line that one's true brothers and sisters are one's peers in the religious life. A central practice of the Hesychasts is the Jesus prayer. Recalling Paul's line from the Bible to pray without ceasing, It's similar in practice to the mantras of the Hindu yogis of India. Pragmatically, the prayer disciplines and refines the mind, focusing it on a single task and drawing it away from discursive thought. If maintained diligently over long periods, the prayer helps suppress the usual chattering mind, producing the inner quiet of hesychasm. Another practice of the hesychasts, which we mentioned in another video, is watchfulness or self-awareness. This term is used a few times in the Bible and seems to refer to a practice of self-consciousness, similar to those of the Eastern mystics. In the Gospels, Christ admonishes the disciples to keep watch, rebuking them when they fall asleep and fail to maintain the practice. A final practice of the Hesychasts is a contemplation of death, recalling its reality constantly and using it as a vehicle for repentance and self-transformation. By continually recalling one's end to mind, your moral and emotional value systems reform into the metanoia we discussed earlier. If we review all of the above, we find the Hesychasts present a unique system of psychology, one which looks at the complete human experience, seeks fulfillment in stillness, and integrates the teachings of classical thinkers. In all, they offer a manual of self-perfection, peace, and contentedness. Through their practices, they seek to build a kingdom within the contemplative, within the soul, recalling Christ who said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you."